At 2:11 in the morning on the coldest night of the winter of 1944, radio operator Jonah Vale heard his own voice coming through a dead frequency. The voice sounded older, breathless, and very afraid. It gave Jonah one instruction: do not let the patrol cross St. Aura Bridge. Jonah's unit had been ordered across Black Ridge before dawn. Somewhere beyond it, an artillery observer was tracking a column of civilians fleeing the occupied valley. If the patrol destroyed the observer's transmitter before sunrise, nearly 800 people would reach the border. If they failed, the guns would find them on the open road. There were 5 soldiers in the patrol. Corporal Miriam Voss commanded. Tomas Rook scouted ahead. Calder Reed carried the explosives. Lena Sorrell was the medic. Jonah carried a 40-pound field radio that had not received a clear signal in 3 days. None of them believed his story about the voice. Then St. Aura Bridge exploded. The patrol was still 50 yards away when charges hidden beneath the ice tore the stone arch apart. Had they followed the original route, every one of them would have been standing on it. In the ringing silence, Jonah's radio spoke again. Take the cemetery path. Keep Rook away from the bell tower. Voss assumed the occupiers were feeding them instructions. Rook assumed Jonah was losing his mind. But the warning included something no enemy could know. Reed had stolen a silver lighter from headquarters, and Lena carried a letter she had never opened. The voice ended by repeating the patrol's private call sign. Lantern 5, you have 23 minutes. They entered the ruined village by the cemetery wall. A rifle cracked from the bell tower. Rook was not beneath it, because Jonah had pulled him back seconds earlier. The bullet shattered the radio's wooden case instead. Jonah stared at the smoking hole. The voice had predicted the shot, but it had predicted the wrong victim. That difference mattered. If the transmission truly came from the future, then the future could be changed. Voss ordered Jonah to ask the voice a question only he could answer. Jonah pressed the key and said, "What did my brother call the river behind our house?" Static answered. Then his own voice whispered, "The road that forgot the sea." No one laughed after that. They crossed the village in single file, following instructions that arrived before each danger. A collapsed bakery concealed a mine wire. A burned ambulance held 2 enemy soldiers waiting in silence. Every warning saved them, but every warning also directed them closer to the abandoned listening post beneath Black Ridge. Inside the post, all the clocks had stopped at 2:38, exactly 27 minutes after Jonah's first transmission. The walls were covered with chalk circles, crossed out times, and the same sentence written again and again. The signal returns before the sender. Beneath it, someone had drawn Jonah's radio, including the fresh bullet hole. They found the post's last operator beside a desk, dead for weeks. His headphones were still on. In his hand was a note addressed to Jonah by name. It read, "When you hear yourself, do not answer the final message." On the back, in Jonah's handwriting, were coordinates for the refugee road. Reed wanted to destroy the room immediately. Voss refused. The artillery observer was still broadcasting from somewhere inside the mountain, and sunrise was less than an hour away. Jonah tuned the damaged radio. His future voice returned, weaker now. "Rook will open the iron door. Stop him, or Lena dies." At the end of the corridor stood an iron door painted red. Rook reached for the wheel before anyone could warn him. Jonah struck his hand away. A burst of gunfire punched through the door from the other side, then stopped. When they opened it carefully, they found an automatic weapon tied to a clockwork trigger. Its timer read 2:38. Beyond the trap was a chamber carved into black magnetic stone. Copper wire covered the walls like roots. In the center stood a transmitter built from military parts, mine equipment, and a ring of polished magnetite. Its vacuum tubes were warm. The machine was running, although its power cable had been cut. Lena found a technical ledger inside a steel cabinet. The occupiers had discovered that artillery blasts compressed the magnetic field beneath Black Ridge. For a few seconds after each barrage, a strong radio signal entered the rock and emerged 27 minutes earlier. The listening post had not been predicting attacks. It had been reporting them backward through time. The final pages were written in Jonah's hand. They described the broken bridge, the sniper's bullet, the cemetery path, and the red door. Each entry ended with the exact words Jonah had already heard. The last complete line said, "At 2:38 the chamber seals. Jonah Vale remains inside." Jonah checked his watch. It was 2:29. 9 minutes remained. The future voice told them that the artillery observer was not a person. It was the machine itself. It had been calculating the refugee column's position from intercepted signals. At 2:38, it would transmit the final coordinates to the guns. There was only one way to stop it. Someone had to enter the central booth, reverse the transmitter, and send false coordinates during the next barrage. Once the process began, the magnetic surge would lock the blast door for 27 minutes. The ledger claimed Jonah entered alone. It did not say he came out. Voss ordered Reed to place explosives around the chamber instead. The future voice shouted through the radio, "If you destroy it before the transmission, the guns fire on the road." A shell struck the ridge above them. Dust fell. The magnetite ring glowed white, and every radio in the room began speaking with Jonah's voice at a different age. One voice begged them to leave. Another recited the names of the refugees. A third repeated the warning about the bridge. Jonah understood. These were not separate ghosts. They were fragments of the same 27 minutes, reflected through the rock each time the artillery fired. Somewhere ahead of him, he was already inside the booth. At 2:36, the machine printed the true firing coordinates. Lena compared them with the map. They pointed directly to the refugee column. Reed could redirect the signal, but the control key was inside the booth. Jonah removed the radio from his back and handed it to Voss. "When I speak," he said, "believe everything except my last instruction." He entered the booth and turned the key. Steel shutters slammed over the windows. The clock reached 2:38. Sound disappeared, then returned all at once. The barrage above, the transmitter screaming, and his own voice coming from a speaker before he had opened his mouth. The loop was waiting for him to complete it. Jonah read the false coordinates. The machine sent them to the enemy battery, and 27 minutes into the past. Then he began transmitting the warnings that had brought the patrol safely to the chamber. He warned them about the bridge, the bell tower, the mine wire, and the red door. With every sentence, the ledger filled itself behind him. At last he reached the final message. The ledger said he would order Voss to abandon the post and seal the mountain. If he spoke those words, the patrol would survive, but the booth would become his tomb. Jonah remembered the sniper's bullet striking the radio instead of Rook. The future was not a command. It was only an unfinished draft. Jonah pressed the key. Miriam ignored the ledger. At 3:05, opened the maintenance hatch beneath the western cable drum. Then run. The page in front of him blackened. Every written line after that moment vanished. For the first time all night, no future voice answered. The false coordinates reached the artillery battery. Its guns turned and fired, not at the refugees, but at the listening post's own transmission mast. Voss dragged the others through the maintenance hatch seconds before the ridge erupted. The blast buried the chamber and silenced every radio in the valley. At 3:05, Voss found the hatch Jonah had described. Behind it was a narrow ventilation shaft the occupiers had omitted from every plan. Reed cut through the grate. Lena crawled into the smoke and found Jonah unconscious beside the ruined booth, alive because his altered message had brought them back. The refugee column crossed the border at sunrise. Official reports credited a navigation error in the enemy battery. No report mentioned a machine that transmitted through time or a ledger that rewrote itself. Jonah kept one object from Black Ridge, the cracked tuning dial from the radio that had spoken in his voice. 27 years later, Jonah woke at 2:11 on the same winter night. The broken dial was turning by itself inside a locked drawer. A voice came from the wood, not young Jonah's voice, but his own, old and trembling. It said, "Miriam opened the correct hatch. I need you to remember the one we left closed."